You are sitting in a meeting right now, not physically, maybe, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. Someone is explaining something that could have been an email. There's a PowerPoint slide with a pie chart that means absolutely nothing. Your coffee has gone cold. You're nodding. You're pretending to take notes. And somewhere in the back of your skull, a quiet, ancient voice is whispering, "This is not what you were made for." That voice is not anxiety. That voice is not laziness. That voice is 300,000 years of human instinct politely trying to tell you that something has gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. Here is the number that should keep you awake at night. The average human being spends roughly 90,000 hours of their life working. 90,000 hours! That is more time than you will spend laughing, more time than you will spend with your children during their actual childhood, more time than you will spend doing anything that makes you feel genuinely, deeply alive. And the most disturbing part is not the number itself. The most disturbing part is that nobody told you this was optional. Nobody handed you a contract. Nobody sat you down at age 7 and said, "Here's the deal. You're going to spend 1/3 of your conscious existence making someone else richer. And in return, you'll get just enough money to afford a slightly nicer version of exhaustion." It just happened. Slowly, quietly, like water rising in a room you didn't notice you were locked inside. But here is the question that changes everything. What if this arrangement, this schedule, this salary, this alarm at 6:47 a.m., what if none of it is natural? What if the life you are living right now, the emails, the deadlines, the performance reviews, the Sunday anxiety about Monday, what if all of that is an accident, a historical mistake that snowballed over 10,000 years into something so enormous and so normal that nobody even questions it anymore? Because the evidence, and I mean real physical scientific evidence dug out of the ground by archaeologists with brushes and patience, that evidence suggests that the life you are grinding through right now looks absolutely nothing like the life human beings lived for the overwhelming majority of their existence on this planet. Let's go back, way back, before your country existed, before cities existed, before the concept of a landlord existed, which, honestly, good riddance. For roughly 95% of human history, nobody owned your time. Not a boss, not a government, not a corporation with a mission statement about family culture that somehow still expects you in the office on Saturday. You woke up when your body was finished sleeping, not when an alarm decided your rest was inconvenient for productivity. You woke up because your nervous system, after hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, had figured out exactly how much sleep a human being actually needs. And the answer, it turns out, is more than 6 hours and a triple espresso. In 1966, a Cambridge anthropologist named Richard Lee did something that the entire field of economics probably wishes he hadn't done. He spent months living alongside the Ju-Hoansi people of the Kalahari, one of the last remaining communities still living by hunting and gathering. He tracked everything, what they ate, when they ate, how long it took to get it. And the results were so surprising that academics spent the next 2 decades arguing about whether he had counted correctly. Adults, on average, spent between 15 and 20 hours per week on food-related activities. 15 to 20 hours per week. You probably spend more time than that in meetings where nobody has a clear agenda. The rest of their time was entirely, completely, gloriously their own. No inbox, no KPIs, no quarterly targets, just time, open and unhurried, stretching out in front of them like a field with no fence. And before you say it, yes, people have said this, but their lives were hard. They were always on the edge of death. Survival was constant suffering. That argument sounds reasonable until you look at the bones. Archaeologists have spent decades comparing the physical remains of ancient hunter-gatherers to the early farming populations that came after them. And what they found is, frankly, embarrassing for agriculture. Hunter-gatherer skeletons were taller, their bones were denser, their teeth, remarkably, were far healthier, which is funny because they did not have toothpaste or a dentist reminding them about plaque buildup every 6 months. Their joints showed far less wear and damage. Their spines did not collapse under the weight of repetitive grinding labor. The bones do not lie. The people who lived without jobs were physically healthier than the people who invented farming, which was supposedly the great leap forward for human civilization. The great leap forward, it appears, was mostly a leap forward for back pain. But here is the part of this story that genuinely stops me in my tracks every single time I think about it. If survival was desperate and exhausting, if every waking hour was consumed by the struggle to stay alive, then explain this. Explain why, 30,000 years ago, someone crawled deep into a cave in southern France, lit a small fire, and spent hours, possibly days, painting animals on a stone wall that no sunlight would ever touch. Not for food, not for shelter, not because their manager put it on their quarterly goals. They did it because they had time, because they had energy left over after surviving, because creating something beautiful is what human beings do when nobody is forcing them to do something else. That cave exists. Those paintings are still there. Horses and lions and rhinoceroses drawn with shading and perspective and movement that would not embarrass a modern artist 30,000 years ago, by someone who, according to modern economic logic, should have been too busy surviving to have any business making art. And it was not just painting. In a cave in South Africa, archaeologists found shell beads from 100,000 years ago. Tiny perforated shells, carefully drilled, clearly designed to be worn as jewelry. The nearest ocean was 20 kilometers away. Somebody walked 40 kilometers round trip just to collect pretty shells, then sat down and drilled precise holes through each one with a stone tool. Not because it helped them survive, but because they wanted to look good, which honestly is extremely relatable. In Germany, researchers found a flute carved from a vulture bone, 40,000 years old, with 5 perfectly spaced finger holes. Somebody understood music well enough to engineer an instrument. Somebody had the time, the focus, and the creative energy to make something that exists purely for the experience of beauty. These are not the artifacts of a species running desperately from death. These are the artifacts of a species with leisure time, using it in the most gloriously, stubbornly human way possible. So here's the picture that the evidence is actually painting, and it looks nothing like the story you were told. Our ancestors were not primitive, desperate, exhausted survivors barely clinging to existence. They were people, actual people with humor and relationships and skills and creative ambitions and bad ideas and inside jokes around a fire. They were people who worked less than you do, ate food that was more nutritious than yours, slept better than you, had stronger bodies than yours, and spent their free time making art and music and jewelry and stories. And somewhere between then and now, we made a series of decisions, or rather decisions were made for us by history, by accident, by population pressure and power structures that resulted in you sitting in that meeting, nodding at that pie chart, waiting for permission to go to the bathroom. The question is not whether something went wrong. Something very clearly went wrong. The question, the one that should follow you out of this video and into your evening and maybe your sleep, is this: when exactly did it happen? When did human beings stop owning their own time? When did the alarm clock replace the sunrise? When did the paycheck replace the freedom? The answer is older and stranger and more accidental than you think. And it starts with a seed dropped in soil 10,000 years ago in a place called the Fertile Crescent by someone who had absolutely no idea what they were setting in motion. The Cage You Call a Career Part 2. Nobody invented slavery in a day. Nobody sat down one morning, cracked their knuckles, and decided that human beings should spend the majority of their conscious lives doing things they would never choose to do for free. It did not happen like that. It happened the way most catastrophes happen, slowly, incrementally, with the best of intentions, one reasonable decision at a time, until one day you look up and realize that the cage around you was built so gradually that you never even heard the door close. The agricultural revolution was not a revolution in the way we use that word today. It was not a sudden, dramatic uprising. It was a slow, quiet, almost invisible shift that took thousands of years to complete. And by the time anyone could have objected, the population had grown too large to go back. The trap had already been sprung, and the bait was bred. Here is how it started. Somewhere around 10,000 years ago, in the region we now call the Middle East, human beings began doing something they had occasionally done before, but never committed to seriously. They started saving seeds. Instead of eating everything they gathered, they kept some back, pressed them into the earth, and waited. The first harvests were probably accidental discoveries. Someone noticed that plants grew where food scraps had fallen, and a clever mind made the connection, and in the short term, it worked beautifully. A small patch of cultivated grain could feed more people than the same area of wild land. Populations grew, settlements formed. For the first generation or two, it probably felt like genuine progress, like humanity had finally figured something out. What they had actually figured out was how to build a treadmill that their great-great-grandchildren could never get off. Because here is the brutal mathematics of farming that nobody in that first generation could have understood. More food creates more people. More people require more food. More food requires more land. More land requires more labor. More labor requires organizing people. Organizing people requires hierarchy. Hierarchy requires enforcement. Enforcement requires soldiers. Soldiers require feeding. Feeding soldiers requires more farming. And round it goes, spinning faster with every generation, demanding more work, more structure, more compliance, more of your time, more of your body, more of your life, until the concept of a human being who simply wakes up and does whatever they feel like has become so foreign that we have a clinical word for people who try to live that way. We call them unemployed, and we say it like it is a disease. The skeletal record of this transition is one of the most uncomfortable things in all of archaeology. Scientists can identify the exact moment in history when a population switched from hunting and gathering to farming, not from tools, not from pottery, but from bones. Farming skeletons are shorter. On average, early agricultural humans lost several centimeters of height compared to their hunter-gatherer predecessors, a direct result of a narrower, grain-heavy diet that lacked the nutritional variety that wild food provided. Their teeth were disasters, cavities, abscesses, decay, conditions that were genuinely rare among hunter-gatherers became epidemic among farming populations almost immediately. Their spines curved, their hips and knees deteriorated. Women's pelvic bones show evidence of spending entire days bent over grinding grain by hand, a posture so repetitive and so sustained that it permanently reshaped their skeletons. These were not people thriving on progress. These were people whose bodies were being slowly consumed by a system that needed their labor more than it needed their health, and yet they could not stop. That is the part that makes it genuinely tragic rather than merely interesting. By the time the physical cost of farming became clear, there were already too many people to feed any other way. The hunting grounds that had sustained smaller groups for hundreds of thousands of years could not support 10 times the population. The wild plants and animals that had fed your ancestors could not be scaled up to meet the demand that agriculture itself had created. The door behind them had quietly disappeared. They were not choosing farming over freedom anymore. They were choosing farming over starvation. And that is a completely different kind of choice. That is not a decision. That is a surrender. With farming came something else that hunter-gatherer societies had largely managed to avoid. And this is the part that should make you genuinely angry if you think about it carefully enough. Storage. When you can grow food in large quantities, you can store it. And when you can store it, you can own it. And when you can own it, some people can own more of it than others. And when some people own more food than others, those people have power over the people who do not. For the first time in human history, a small group of individuals could control whether other people ate or starved. And every power structure that has existed since then, every empire, every feudal system, every corporation with a job offer that says competitive salary, is essentially a variation of that original arrangement. You do what I say, and in return, I allow you access to the resources you need to survive. Welcome to employment. It is 10,000 years old, and it has barely changed its pitch. By around 5,000 years ago, cities had emerged in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, and with cities came something that would have been completely incomprehensible to any human being who lived before agriculture: strangers. For the first 300,000 years of human existence, you knew everyone in your social world personally. You had relationships with every single person whose cooperation you might need. Trust was built through years of shared experience, shared meals, shared danger. But in a city of 10,000 people, you cannot personally know everyone. You cannot rely on relationship alone to organize labor, distribute resources, or maintain order. So humans invented the next great cage: bureaucracy, records, hierarchies, titles. The idea that your value as a human being could be assigned a number, written on a clay tablet, and filed somewhere for future reference. The world's first performance review was probably written in Sumerian, and I am certain it was just as demoralizing as the one you received last November. Work, at this point, became something fundamentally different from what it had been before. For hunter-gatherers, the things you did to survive, tracking animals, identifying plants, navigating landscapes, reading weather, required extraordinary skill, deep knowledge, and genuine engagement. The work was hard, yes, but it was varied, it was meaningful, it was yours. You were not performing a task assigned by someone above you. You were applying your full human intelligence to a real and immediate problem. But in the agricultural city, specialization arrived. You were a potter, you were a weaver, you were a grain counter. You did the same thing, in the same way, in the same place, every single day for someone else's benefit, in exchange for enough food to keep doing it tomorrow. The repetition was not a side effect. The repetition was the point. A specialized worker is a dependent worker. A dependent worker does not ask inconvenient questions about whether any of this is actually necessary. And then, roughly 250 years ago, someone looked at all of this and the farming, the cities, the specialization, the hierarchy, and decided it was not quite efficient enough. The Industrial Revolution did not create the cage. The cage was already ancient by then. What the Industrial Revolution did was put a clock on it. Before factories, even agricultural laborers had rhythms. Seasons dictated work. Harvests had a beginning and an end. There were feast days and rest days and long winter evenings that belonged to nobody in particular. But the factory needed bodies at a specific time, performing specific actions at a specific pace for a specific number of hours. The clock tower was not built to help workers know when to go home. It was built to make sure they showed up. Time itself was colonized. Your hours, your minutes, your mornings, all of it was standardized, measured, and sold back to you on weekends. The office you sit in today is a direct descendant of that factory floor. The language has been softened. We say flexible working hours now. We say work-life balance now. We have bean bags in the break room and a company wellness newsletter. But the fundamental architecture is identical. Your time belongs to someone else. Your output is measured. Your continued access to food and shelter depends on your compliance. And the most sophisticated trick the system ever pulled was convincing you that this is simply how life works, that this is human nature, that your hunter-gatherer ancestors who painted horses on cave walls and carved flutes from bird bones and walked 40 kilometers just to find pretty shells were the primitive ones. That you, sitting under fluorescent lighting waiting for a meeting to end, are somehow the pinnacle of human achievement. But here's the part nobody tells you. Some people figured this out, not recently, much earlier than you think. And what they did about it will genuinely change the way you look at the life you're living right now. That is part 3, and it is the most important part of this entire story. You will see what's going to happen now in next video, so do not forget to subscribe my channel.